Hi, everybody, and welcome back to this week's roundup of news, current events, and other stuff that I dove into live on Twitch. Topics include the criminal trial of Sean Combs has finally come to an end. Although he was convicted of the charge of transportation to engage in prostitution, unfortunately, he was acquitted of the more serious charges of sex trafficking and racketeering. Donald Trump and the Republicans passed the Big Beautiful Bill, aka the worst piece of legislation in modern American history. If you are not super rich or a corporation, this will absolutely have dire consequences for you. Western media, politicians, and public figures are much more upset about Bob Vylan, an English punk rap duo who led a Death to the IDF chant at Glastonbury Music Festival, than they are the actual genocide being carried out by that same IDF. But some good news, my podcast partner Sandwich and I raised over $10,000 for Point of Pride with the very generous help of our communities. Point of Pride is a nonprofit that since 2016 has helped tens of thousands of trans people globally get the life-saving, gender-affirming care that they need and deserve. So thank you to our communities, thank you to Point of Pride for the work you do, and to our trans siblings and all LGBTQ members around the world. We see you, we love you, and we are always here to support you. For this kind of content and more, make sure to check out my live streams at twitch.tv/Caroline Kwan. I go live just about every night around 6:00 p.m. Pacific time.
So I think this has to be seen as a big win for the defense. When it comes to the most serious charges, Sean Combs was not found guilty. It is still serious to be convicted of federal crimes, but in terms of the overall case and what Sean Combs was charged with, at this point, what we're looking for is seeing if bail, whether or not Sean Combs will be released essentially almost immediately, maybe today, or if he will be detained until sentencing. And then we're looking forward to see what sentencing is going to look like.
He was denied bail. He will be sentenced in October, but his team and the people close to him have obviously been celebrating this as a win. It's very frustrating to have the judge is recognizing that he should not be let out in public at this time, and yet it was also acquitted of serious charges. But it's like, okay, so we recognize that he's a dangerous person, that he has caused mass harm, and most likely will continue to, because he wasn't found guilty of the most serious charges against him. I mean, I'm sure he'll try and be on his best behavior as things are still fresh, but
there will be an exchange of memorandum where the prosecution will say, this is why we think that he should be behind bars for a long time. These are all the aggravating factors. The defense will say, here are all the mitigating factors, and we actually don't think that he should be behind bars for that long.
Diddy's supporters were celebrating outside the courtroom today by pouring baby oil on themselves. I hate it here. And can I say too, I'm in a very cynical mindset right now, but I noticed that a lot of people didn't cover the trial. And I genuinely think it's because for content creators, there was less of an opportunity to shit on women in the way there was with Amber Heard and Blake Lively, namely because of this video where Diddy is abusing Cassie, and because of like the decades of this being an open secret, and yet like him still being acquitted on these very serious charges. Also because it wasn't live streamed. That's true. So it like, not as easy to make content out of it. So like, we got our jokes off about freak offs and baby oil. Otherwise, like, I guess this is not as content worthy.
I also think it is possible that we could see some minimal jail time. I do want to remind everybody that he has been in prison for a long time. There was, of course, pre-trial detention in this case. And so even if he is sentenced to a number of months, it could be that the judge concludes, basically, you've already served your time.
I'm just thinking too about Cassie and about Jane, and they were the two of the biggest witnesses for the prosecution, and how the combined days of their testimony and it being a cornerstone of the prosecution's case, just how it must feel for them and all of the other victims to have like gone through that, to have like re-traumatized themselves, and to know that he is going to be back out there. He's going to be back out there, and hopefully he will be so burdened by civil lawsuits, because there are many civil lawsuits, and maybe that will, I don't know, bury him for the rest of his life.
This was the best that he could have hoped for. Under the RICO and sex trafficking charges, he could have been facing a life sentence. And under the charges that he was convicted of, or the jury reached a guilty verdict on, it really could just be probation. So this was the best that he could hope for. I think that the prosecutor had probably overcharged this case with the RICO, where it's a criminal enterprise that we usually see applied.
I honestly, look, I am not a lawyer, okay? I'm not a lawyer. I do not have a legal background. But looking at this, I feel like throwing the RICO charge on top of the sex trafficking and transportation engaged in prostitution charges probably had an effect on the jury not finding him guilty of the most serious charges, because RICO is so complicated. And also the prosecution did not introduce a single witness to be like, yep, I was part of the criminal enterprise and these were things that I was directed to do, like to make it very clear cut. And so it overly complicated the case, and it affected the jury's view on the sex trafficking charges. It's also why, I mean, the prosecution, I absolutely lay blame on here for mishandling things and for tacking on a very complicated legal charge that probably made it harder for the jury than to convict him of the sex trafficking charges. Because Sean Combs was the only one who was on trial. They did not extend this to anyone else, right? They didn't bring charges against anyone else, and they didn't bring in any witnesses to directly testify to the racketeering charge.
Here, this was an enterprise of one man who was doing some really depraved things, but everyone was working for him and doing his bidding. It wasn't the traditional type of RICO case, so I don't think that really made a lot of sense to some of the jurors. And now this the transportation charge, okay, sure, so he's found guilty of that, but he's also served a significant amount of time in custody already, and it would seem appropriate that he could be walking out that door today. This is the thing about juries, they're unpredictable, but what we heard from the notes were that there were firmly held beliefs by some jurors and an inability to reach a verdict on the RICO charge, and somehow a good night's sleep allowed them to reconcile some of these things. And what we see is
a good night's sleep, and also it being 4th of July weekend coming up. This has been months of these jurors being involved on this case. They were over it. They were done, especially knowing now that they had acquitted him of the sex trafficking charges. The people who were the holdouts, the jurors who were the holdouts yesterday when they could not come to a consensus on the racketeering, probably just went, yeah, you know what? We'll side with you guys.
They do want to reach a unanimous verdict. They don't want to have the 7 weeks of their life go for nothing and have the victim and defendant have.
Were you also expecting this outcome, or did you think we'd have better results? I mean, yesterday I said I think there's a world where the guilty verdict in this, or the charge that he is found guilty of, is going to be the least serious charge, which is transportation to engage in prostitution. I definitely didn't think that they would find him guilty of racketeering. I basically was like, don't be surprised if he's not found guilty of sex trafficking either, but it just is still, it's still awful. Like, it still feels like a blow. And then on top of that, like, what really triggered me today was, this is why fuck Twitter, but what really triggered me today was just how this was being dismissed and like being treated as a distraction from the from coverage over the big beautiful bill, where it's like, man, this bill has been, what are we talking about? It's like, oh, now because in the 11th hour Democrats are talking about how the bill is bad after it passed the Senate and now it's returning to the House, when it's like, where have they been otherwise? Where has liberal media been otherwise? So now you're gonna yell at people. The interesting thing about the Diddy verdict is that House Republicans are about to vote to take away health care from tens of millions of Americans. He is basically doing what he thinks is a clever segue to be like, here's the important news. Because Aaron Rupar is a liberal whose politics are Republicans bad. Yeah, that it's a frivolous thing to pay attention to this when we've got this disastrous reconciliation bill. You know who's also going to lose healthcare? Victims of sexual violence who, without adequate healthcare, makes their recovery, makes their road to, their journeys towards healing that much harder. This passed in the Senate. JD Vance was the tying vote. This is going to the House. I know we feel like, what is calling our Congress people going to do? Even call them to just yell, right? Like, just express your anger and put that pressure on them and be like, look, lay out why this is such a terrible, terrible, terrible tax and policy package.
And I said, let's make it one big, beautiful bill. We're voting essentially on the big, beautiful, that gorgeous, big, beautiful bill.
Why does he talk about a piece of legislation the way he talks about his daughter?
It is truly massive, and it's currently moving through Congress after passing the House by the narrowest of margins.
This is a bill that is going to devastate working class people across the country, which includes people who live in rural areas that have voted for Donald Trump. Okay. Rural voters, they're going to now have to deal with their hospitals, of which in rural areas there are not many. Hospitals having their funding being slashed. They will lose access to their health insurance. They'll be kicked off of SNAP. The way that this is going to make it easier for drilling on public lands in rural areas. This is a bad bill. It's a bad bill, and it is not a bad bill that is partisan. This is not going to if you voted blue, if you're a liberal in this country, then you're going to suffer. That's not how things work, okay? Because the working class and the poor in this country are not divided just by red and...
This past week, I have come out in full transparency and said, when I voted for the one big beautiful bill, I didn't know about this clause.
Yeah, because I can't read.
Great, although to be fair,
I
who
didn't
among
read.
us hasn't approved things that we haven't read properly? About 2/3 of the public say they've heard little or nothing about it, but when they do, they don't like it. As polls show, those who've heard a great deal or good amount about it oppose it by a roughly 2-to-1 margin.
Yeah, and a big part of that is because the Democrats and the liberal media have not been telling people. They are too busy. They're too busy smearing Zohran Mamdani, a member of their own party. They're too busy screaming about Bob Vylan and about, oh my God, anti-Semitism, that they're not out here telling the American public how bad this bill is, talking about how disastrous this will be for most people in this country, because they can't get their heads out of their asses because they're frothing at the mouth to do some Islamophobia.
The bill still needs to clear the Senate and then go back to the House, and things are still coming in and out of it. It is a massive redistribution of wealth upward. Let's talk about the one big beautiful bill and what it will actually do. When Trump talks about this bill, the main thing he emphasizes is that it will extend the tax cuts Republicans passed in 2017. He claims will be good for everyone. The White House recently said it'll deliver a blue-collar boom, all caps. While the bill does contain tax cuts for basically everyone, their benefits are massively concentrated among the wealthiest Americans. In fact, 60% of the tax cuts would go to the top 20% of households. This bill would add trillions to the national debt. And to the extent the bill's tax cuts are going to be paid for at all, it'll be through slashing programs that benefit the poor.
The cuts to healthcare and social services are not going to kick in until after the 2026 midterms. A lot of people in this country are not even they're not going to be aware, and they won't feel the effects of that until after the midterms, until it's way too late. It will trickle down, I promise. Any day now it's gonna trickle.
But the big target here is Medicaid. This bill's defenders will insist Medicaid is safe.
Our legislation preserves Medicaid, strengthens Medicaid for the people who actually need it and deserve it.
We're going to do everything we can to strengthen Medicaid, to preserve it for those who need it the most.
Medicare, Medicaid, None of that stuff is going to be touched.
I would bet you all money have. He doesn't even know what the difference is.
Don't have to.
Major Medicaid cuts are the only way to meet House budget resolution requirements. And the big way this bill tries to do that is by adding work requirements for many low-income recipients, removing a lot of them from the rolls. To get Medicaid, they'd have to prove they worked, volunteered, or went to school for 80 hours a month. That alone is projected to cause over 5 million Americans to lose coverage by the end of the decade.
You don't want able-bodied workers on a program that is intended for
Every single person in this country needs to support Medicare for all. If a candidate for office, if an incumbent who's running for re-election is not running on a platform of Medicare for all, bye, gone.
for single mothers with 2 small children who's just trying to make it. That's what Medicaid is for, not for 29-year-old males sitting on their couches playing video games.
Medicaid is the only way I could even afford insurance right now. Do they not realize how astronomically expensive insurance is? The argument of you are paying for a 29-year-old gamer to sit at home, play video games, and have health insurance. That's not true. And also, when someone loses their health insurance, that means that they're more likely to, when something happens, they have to go to an emergency room. And the hospitals in this country are obligated by law to treat people who are in an emergency room, even if they cannot pay for that care. So that cost then gets passed on to everyone else. And so it will drive up healthcare costs. This bill will drive up healthcare costs for everybody. I don't care. And also, yes, I don't care if somebody's playing video games at home. Everyone deserves healthcare. Healthcare, this is like the fundamental difference, right? In people who believe healthcare is a human right. Healthcare is a human right versus healthcare is something to be commodified. As a human being, your health is something that you should not have to go into debt over, that you should not have to die over because you cannot afford care. That care should be provided to every single person because that is a right of being a human being.
Free! Alright, but have you heard this one though? Death to the IDF! Death to the IDF! Death to the IDF! Time must be, will be, inshallah, it will be.
Yeah, and by the way, people are going on TV and straight up lying about him. Look at this.
I'm not sure what was worse, Mr. Robinson Foster's call for the death of Israeli Defense Forces or a mindless audience's brain-dead repetition of it. Since the IDF is all that stands between Israel's survival and it being wiped out by its Islamist enemies, to call for the death of the IDF is tantamount to advocating a second Holocaust. But even the Nazis did not scream, "Death to the Jews, death to the Jews."
Yeah, okay, so what they're doing here is they're doing the anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. Saying death to a military force that is carrying out genocide, that has committed every war crime under the sun, is the same as saying death to the Jews, which no, it is not. This is just a lie. This is a lie. This is purposeful defamation. This is doing criticizing the IDF now is anti-Semitism. If you say death to the IDF, then that's the same thing as saying death to the Jews, which no, it is not.
Well, critics of the furore say it's free speech, but free speech can still have consequences. Bob Vylan were dropped by their agents today. The United States has revoked their visas. They're also now facing a criminal investigation, which
seriously, if somebody is committing war crimes, if a group is committing war crimes, you're not allowed to call for the end of that? Is that what now how things go? Is this going to be the standard?
Taylor, let me start with you because you reposted somebody who said this. If you think death to the IDF is a bad thing.
I'm sorry, but these two right here, it's giving Timu Hassan and Tyler Oakley.
You don't get to describe yourself as anti-fascist going forward. Why did you repost that?
Timu Oakley.
Yeah, I repost tons of commentary on news events, basically. So I was sort of resharing, which is something that I do a lot on my meme page. I kind of just reshare a lot of discourse. I think one thing that's being really lost in all of these conversations is that the Israeli military is committing genocide.
Yes.
And so I completely understand why People are upset about anyone sort of calling for death, but it's important to recognize that the reason that they're calling for death to this sort of amorphous military entity is because that military entity is currently slaughtering babies and committing genocide in Gaza. And so these people that are very outraged that thousands of music goers at Glastonbury would repeat that phrase, I think that they should recognize that if they want to stop people from amplifying those messages and stop people from feeling, that we should destroy the IDF, they should advocate for the end of the genocide.
And in the Iraq War, for example, in 2003, if they chanted death to the British Army and the US military.
People were. First of all, people were.
It's the visuals is because leftist visuals. That's what happens.
The people had done that at a music festival. You'd have thought that was acceptable too.
Well, I never said anything was acceptable. But if you remember, Piers, during the Iraq War, people were chanting "Death to America." Right? I'm smart enough to understand.
No, I'm talking about specifically talking about death to soldiers.
If the IDF were simply peacekeeping, okay, which is impossible given the fact that they are defending a settler colonialist state, so thereby it's just impossible to be simply a peacekeeping force. But if the actions of the IDF were not that of extreme war crimes, of targeting civilians, of genocide, then that's a different story. But they are a genocidal military entity. They are a military force that is committing genocide. So if you condemn genocide, which you should, then you must condemn the forces that are carrying out that genocide, and you must call for an end to them.
Again, that military entity is currently slaughtering innocent babies. We found out Haaretz reported just last week that they were knowingly...
They weren't talking about an entity. They were talking about the soldiers. They wanted death to the IDF soldiers.
No, they didn't say death to the IDF soldiers. They said death to the IDF. Again, the IDF is a military entity. If people would like the public to change their sentiments around the IDF, they should advocate
What
for
do you think the IDF is?
It's a military organization.
When there are recorded and verified instances of them firing on unarmed civilians while they're waiting for aid to be distributed, recorded instances of gang rape, children being admitted to hospital with sniper wounds to the skull, I think it is an appropriate expression of rage and disgust.
So in this particular instance, you say, because of what the IDF has done in Gaza, you would say shouting or leading a chorus, death to the IDF is legit. That's what you're saying.
Absolutely. The same way it is completely legitimate to say destroy ISIS. These are organizations founded on violence, terrorizing innocent civilians, and it is always appropriate to express one's opposition to that. I don't think that it was anti-Semitic, and nor do I think it was inappropriate for a punk band, when this is a genre associated with pushing the boundaries, to lead a chant at what's effectively a concert.